Hello and welcome to Marketing Room 101, the podcast where I invite marketers to join me for a good old rant, and I give them the chance to banish one thing from the industry forever. I'm your host, Ben Norman, Strategy Director at Principles in Leeds, and in this episode I'm joined by one of the sharpest minds and nicest guys in the world of creative effectiveness. Tom Roach is VP of Brand Strategy at Jellyfish, and his CV is enough to intimidate the very best marketers, and me. Tom has held top positions at agencies like BBH and adam&eveDDB. He's led strategy for brands like the BBC, McDonald's, Sainsbury's, Lloyds, KFC and Weetabix, as well as winning gold and silver IPA effectiveness awards along the way. The reason I wanted to invite Tom onto the show is not just because of his obvious experience and expertise, but because he has a skill that's becoming increasingly rare these days. He has a skill to look at the biggest debates in the world of marketing and see the truth in the middle ground or in the grey areas, and I think that comes through in this chat. So here's the conversation I enjoyed very much with Tom Roach, and a special thanks to my friends at Prohibition PR in Leeds for lending me their studio to record this episode in. Tom, welcome to Marketing Room 101.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben.
Thank you for coming in. Now, Tom, can you please do our listeners a favour and get us started by describing the room? What is it like in here in Marketing Room 101?
Okay, well, this room is actually quite a big room, and it's a kind of marketing conference, or it's sort of a generic corporate conference with a big stage and a succession of very slick, possibly American presenters. Not all American, that would be harsh, but a load of presenters selling stuff with very, very boring charts, loads of data, but in a very slick presentational manner, and just an endless succession of these people coming up on stage, just selling their wares like snake oil. And that's it. And I'm just there for hours, days, maybe weeks, I think.
Do you feel a little bit trapped in this scenario, Tom, whereby you came to learn and you found yourself volunteering yourself, potentially paying to turn up somewhere to be sold to for 3 days?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, I do quite a lot of conferences where I'm actually on the stage, and the organisers, some of them try not to have people selling. They'll go, please don't sell, because they know that it's just death for the audience. As soon as somebody gets on stage and starts selling their thing, it just kills everything. So yeah, I guess ironically, as somebody who works in the industry, which is supposedly about selling, or let's broaden it out a bit to saleability, I, like most other people in the world, don't really like being sold to.
At Principles, we did an event last year called Every Second Counts with another agency, Boutique in Leeds. The idea that every single second of attention that you have is so vitally important, but the different media we have available all do different jobs with that attention. So we had different people representing all different media, but we made the mistake of doing out of home, where we got 4 media owners and a panel discussion. And I've never seen anything. It was like something off The Apprentice. It was just a battle of 4 people trying to compete.
The stats about why their out-of-home packages are better.
Yeah, exactly that.
We've got better sites. We've got more footfall. We've got more traffic, more dwell time. What a horrendous notion. Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Yeah.
And the irony is, it undersold what is one of the most effective possible channels. It ends up underselling it because of the sales. So that was the irony, I think.
Yeah.
So Tom, you are VP of Brand Strategy at Jellyfish. I saw that you'd recently written that you landed on the job 5 years ago because of a blog post you wrote called The Wrong and the Short of It, about the combined benefits of brand and performance marketing. So 5 years on, how do you think that has evolved? Do you still need to make that case? And how does combining the two actually work in practice?
Yeah. So I think that, that whole topic of long and short, brand and performance, brand building and sales activation, the language changes depending on who's talking about it, writing about it, or the organization and their way of thinking about it. The topic, I think, will remain sort of permanently a thing that we have to keep going over and rehearsing. It seems to be pretty kind of evergreen as an issue with the way different organizations are structured and that people talk and do marketing or advertising. I think it probably has moved on a little bit, at least in this sort of, I guess, the LinkedIn bubble that I'm in. you do feel like there's a bit more of an understanding of the importance these days of combining it. I think you're seeing more people like McKinsey now coming out and talking about the importance of brand building. I think there's probably a shift in some of the discourse. I think it would be a mistake to think that somehow the world has changed and now everybody believes that these things need to be in balance. I think there was a very, very strong discourse that probably started from the dot-com bubble, the digital platforms arriving. There was a very heavy performance advertising focus. And then as they matured and as they maxed out their market share of the sort of sales activation, direct response, performance bit, and they've had to head up into doing brand building to try and steal a bit more market share from some of the more traditional media owners. That's, I think, meant that there is more of an acknowledgement from some of the digital players that brand is really important. And then I think with the latest sort of wave when it comes to AI appearing, some interesting things happening with search, conversations about the decline of traditional search. There seems to be a slight course correction further towards brand. But the reality, actually, when you look at total global advertising budgets, how do they actually split? It's still massively in favor of more of the direct response type stuff. So let's not kid ourselves. Just because in our bubbles, we're seeing a little bit of a course correction towards brand, the whole world actually does that. And partly that's, of course, to do with the fact that the vast majority in these kind of numerical terms of advertisers are tiny little businesses who want to do some search. They want to do something to drive a sale immediately. And they're not really in the business of building long-term brands. They're not in the business of having bigger budgets, etc. So let's not kid ourselves that there will ever be a massive sea change towards brand building. The big advertisers, I think, though, probably do recognize it now more. And the kind of main players, your Googles and your Diageos and Unilevers and all those kinds of big multinational corporations talk a pretty good game, I think, these days about getting it, I think.
Do you think, so one of the things that is often banded around out of the long and the short, and if you read the paper, which I know many people will have done, the nuance comes through, but I think, as we know, people will take a headline and put it on slides to their clients. So we talk a lot about 60-40. You need to put 60% into brand building, you need to put 40% into the sales activation. How should that work in the real world? How should clients actually work out how much of my money I should spend on one versus the other, rather than just trying to take this broad brush of 60-40?
I think even Les Burnett and Peter Fields, that they're very clear these days that that's a kind of rule of thumb. Yeah. You know, I don't think, while some people interpreted it as a law, even in a lot of their work, it's pretty clear that it changes from category to category. It will change from brand to brand. It will change depending on the maturity of the brand. They're pretty clear that, you know, you probably want to start doing some direct response activity and then layer in some brand activity. So it is absolutely not a hard and fast thing. How you actually do it, of course, I'm sorry to say it depends. And it depends being always the sort of cop out, I know. I mean, I really, really like it when businesses just start by doing something and they edge towards a balance. There was a brand called Gusto that kind of did it that way. And they ended up, through really good measurements, seeing the brand activity that they were layering into their plan, they eventually got to a sort of rough 60-40 balance. And they claim that was not intentional, in the sense that they decided to get to 60-40 because they'd read that was the balance you should go for. They measured it and they saw it coming through in their numbers. I think it was probably econometric modeling they were using. Big advocate for econometric modeling as the way to do that. I know that that's not for everybody. It's not something that everybody can do, and sometimes people don't have the time or the money for. So I guess that's the sort of media side of it. When it comes to the creative side, I mean, a very common question is, what even is a brand ad, or a brand campaign? Yeah. And my answer to that is always, well, it's something that leaves a lasting impression beyond the behavior that might happen today or in the moment. And so really a brand building ad is really just something that just lives a little longer in the mind, that leaves a longer impression, has a memory impact, maybe has a bit more emotion, and that, days or weeks later might be able to be triggered when you see that brand in store or online, or when you see a more of a direct response piece of activity, you might go, oh yeah, there was that thing. Yeah, that is a good choice for whatever I need right now. So I think it's hard to get too theoretical, want to be practical. Often it's just about making sure there are connections and visual clues, visual connections, visual glue between your activity, making sure that there's consistency between a brand ad in inverted commas versus something that's a more of a kind of a direct response piece of communication. So making sure there's a connection between those two things, I think, is one of the first rules, actually.
I like that. And that last point you just made there about consistency. Now, I talk to a lot of clients about, I don't know if I've coined this term or not, but twin axis consistency, which is consistency in place and consistency across time. Or you might call it consistency and continuity working together. And I think that's something that's often lost in this conversation about consistency. Yes, you need to be consistent over time. The stuff that Andrew Tyndall's done, the stuff that System 1 have done around compound creativity, stick with an idea if it's good.
Yeah.
The longer you stick with it, the more effective it will become. But also consistency between what you might be doing on TV, what you might be doing in PR, in social, wherever you might be, right down to what you're doing in, making sure there is that thread that runs through at every point.
And that's something that I think is in danger of being lost or forgotten. And that's a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about with the creative fragmentation, particularly in social and influencer work and creator-led work. That's really about that. It's making sure you've got some brand assets, got some brand language, got a strategy that a creator can use so that kind of work is not in isolation and is able to connect up with the rest of your work. And I think there's a lot of missed opportunity by people not doing that. Twin axis is good. Over time through channel, I think is right, absolutely right. And it's hard. It's hard stuff because it's kind of an operational, organizational thing as much as anything. It's about briefing. It's about making sure you're really religiously focused on each piece when you're doing it, and not allowing things that are too far apart. But that's a judgment, isn't it? Because you want to allow creativity its room to flex and do different things and build in different directions. But you also need to create that connectivity with what you've already done. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, I think, the reality is different teams, different agencies working on different briefs. And then you've probably got a guidelines doc somewhere that says this is our solution to consistency. And it sits somewhere on a deck, but it's 80 pages long and only a few people have read it. Like you say, even if the marketing director, the CMO, believes in twin axis consistency, the actual reality of making that happen in a large organization can be almost impossible, right?
Yeah, totally. And you've got 1,000 other voices internally, and you're never doing things in total isolation. And it's just that natural thing of new CMO comes in, new marketing person, new agency. Everybody wants to prove that they've got something of value to do. And I remember working on Weetabix at BBH. There was tremendous pressure and, of course, excitement and interest in doing something genuinely new for that brand. It just happened that at the time of that brand, when I was working on it, the stuff that we'd done that was new wasn't working as well as it should. And we discovered through some really good research that actually some of the older things, some of the older principles that brand had in its idea, have you had your Weetabix, was still very present in people's minds. And so that was a lever that we pulled on to get some growth, and it worked. And I had to kind of do a bit of hand-holding, not only with the client, but also internally to go, no, this is the right thing to do. It may not win us awards. It may not get the agency looking as innovative as it could do, but actually the most important thing is the brand and its growth right now.
Okay, so Tom, you are here because you would like to banish something from the world of marketing. Can you please reveal what you would like to banish from marketing?
Yeah, so I think this is quite a big one, but I want to banish, and it's going to be hard. I want to banish false binaries, false dichotomies. I want to banish the idea of things always having to be versus and not and. The core thing being false binaries, but it comes in loads of different guises, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But I see them a lot. I think we've already kind of touched on one, this sort of classic brand and performance thing, which, as we've discussed, maybe has receded a little bit as a problem, which is great. And maybe Les and Pete and maybe a little bit of me have helped a bit to kind of put that one down. But there still remain a ton of other false binaries, and we're seeing loads more emerge. They seem to be a pretty constant in the discourse, and it's maybe quite a human thing to have them because they seem appealing. They're a great way to get attention. A headline that says, you need to be doing X, not Y. Or if you're still doing X, then you're dead. You need to be doing Y. Or X is dead. Y is the new thing. We saw it, in the TV world. If you just Google TV is dead, there are still a million articles saying TV is dead. And then, of course, the second bit of that sentence is always somebody with something to sell. They've always got some alternative to the thing that they claim is dead, that they actually want to sell you. And I think we can see that at the moment. We're seeing a lot of snake oil salespeople saying, one of the latest ones is search is dead. Traditional search is dead. And now you need to be doing, SEO is dead. GEO is the answer. And of course, those two things are very strongly related. And I really like the thing that the defenders of TV, when they were getting really pissed off with the fact that there were these false narratives about the death of their medium, they'd say, no, TV's not dying, it's having babies. I love that. It was Lindsay Clay and Thinkbox and Tess Alps who used to use that. And it's absolutely true. That's come true. They were saying at that point that it's not dead. There's a million things coming out of the world of TV, through social, through video, through the streamers, SVOD, BVOD, all these other forms of AV, which are related to TV, aren't quite exactly the same as the traditional linear TV delivery, but they could see it. And they were trying to defend the kind of honor of the channel that they loved and were, of course, had a role in trying to help secure the kind of future of. And now you see people saying SEO is dead, long live GEO. And I go, well, SEO isn't dead, it's having babies. The way we see AI overviews, like conversational AI, these are a form of search. They're an evolution of it. They're different in some ways and similar in others. And you need real experts in one. I think currently, as I understand it, GEO is often about 70% similar to more traditional SEO, for example. So there's always a relationship. And it's very rare that that technology doesn't ever just replace a thing. A new technology arrives, and then the previous evolution of that technology will be cannibalized a little bit, or it'll decline a little bit, but the new thing tends to layer in and become a new form. The deaths of things are much, much, much slower than any of the headlines ever claim. And I guess it's basically a form of snake oil, I think. It's kind of hyperbolizing white lies, even full-on lies, to try and sell something. And that I guess we've all got something to sell. We're all saying stuff in order to get attention, to sell our wares. And in the sort of, what we're in, which is the kind of B2B, LinkedIn, thought leader-y sort of community, we've got stuff we need to sell and get attention for. So I understand it and I understand the reasons for it. And I'm probably, occasionally guilty of it. But it just, I find it lacks nuance and it lacks a kind of intellectual honesty, I think.
One of the real reasons I wanted to get you on this show is because I feel like there's so much or and not much and in the industry at the minute. And there's so much, it's black or white, and it's appropriate that you're wearing a grey outfit because I feel like you're somebody who's always been able to see the nuance in an argument or see that the answer is probably in the grey, or to, rather than using data to create a headline, looking at the data and actually thinking, what is the reason for that? And does it affect the entirety of something? Does it just affect a small piece? Is it part of a trend? Just actually thinking a little bit deeper. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but why do you think we have become so tribal in our industry and potentially in the wider world in general? And why do you seem to be immune to it?
Well, I don't think I am immune, but why? I don't think we've become tribal. I just think it's a natural human thing that we've always been. I think humans do kind of exist in communities and tribes. And let's go, historical examples like city-states that hate the neighboring city and they're at permanent war with them. And it's a form of, there was a phrase coined by Freud, actually, the narcissism of small differences. Humans love to define themselves in a certain way and then define themselves against another group. It's just a natural thing that we do. I'm sure it's got some roots in sort of evolutionary biology. The sort of tribalism of football teams and, local derbies and all of that. We hate the Reds, we hate the Blues. And you see it in Gulliver's Travels, the little enders and the big enders who used to fight. The little enders used to to say the only way was to eat your boiled egg from the little end, and the big enders would say the opposite, and they would get into a massive war over this issue. And well, it all comes together because I was lucky enough to work with Les Binet at Adam and Eve, and I think I learned an awful lot from him. The only single thing I ever managed to teach him was the idea of the narcissism of small differences. I told him about this concept, and I think he was quite taken with it. And he and I both experienced this on stage recently at a marketing conference, where I was put there to try and fight for the concept of big as a collection of smalls. And he was put there on stage to big up his talk, which was go big or go home. And I think the talk organizers or the conference organizers were hoping and expecting that he and I would have this big kind of intellectual fight over whether bigness was about collections of smalls or just going big. There was a kind of big or small thing that they wanted us to kind of fight it out about. Of course, I'm not stupid enough that I'm going to get on stage and have a fight, an intellectual fight with the great and amazing Les Binet, because he would kill me on stage in front of hundreds of marketing people. So I didn't do that, and I looked for the commonalities, and we did find some. And in fact, we both ended up coming up with the conclusion that regardless of the differences between our sort of stated positions, we both wanted brands to do things a little bit bigger, a couple of sizes bigger than they, have some ambition. So brands grow if they want to act a bit bigger than they were, do bigger things, do more things, spend more, and act like a bigger brand, essentially, was the basic theory that we both came up with on stage in the moment. And that was a nice example, I think, of trying to find some common ground, trying to find some nuance, not going for the easy headlines in it's this or this. And I think basically neither of us had any interest in there being a kind of marketing week headline, which is Les says it's all about big and Roach and Kite say it's all about lots of smalls. It just didn't seem a battle worth having, or not one that I think either of us would believe in completely. Yeah. I think there's probably a natural, it's probably deeply psychological when it comes to me, of like not wanting conflict and wanting to see common ground. Probably comes from being of a family of 4 kids where there was a lot of angsty kind of argument and wanting there to be more convergence. And actually, you probably see it in me going to Jellyfish in the first place was I think a desire to learn more about this thing that has become called performance marketing. And I come from a world of brand marketing, and a dissatisfaction with the fact that these two worlds existed. And also a dissatisfaction with the fact that media and creative had been split in the 90s and noughties, and wanting to see those things come together. So Jellyfish is a place where we do it all. We do brand and performance, and we do media and creative, and we want to see, and we believe in more converged solutions. We don't believe in the silos in those sort of specialisms. So I think, it's just that thing of none of us is as good as all of us. We do much better when we're all together, when we work as a team, when we collaborate. The reality of what the stuff we're making is, people don't see it as a performance ad or a brand ad. They see it as a thing from a brand, if they see it at all. And so much better that we get it working all in one system than we see it as separate components or parts of a system that are assembled separately and never really put together in a proper way.
I agree fully. And I think there's something interesting about your debate with Les, or the debate that was more of a collaboration, I guess, which is we seem to have lost the idea that there is potentially more than one right answer. And I guess that's what comes down to this tribal point, isn't it? And I think you get this, whether you're reviewing creative ideas, whether you're reviewing a media plan, whether it's agencies competing with each other, whether it's different internal teams within an organization. And it's like, the truth is, there is more than one right answer. And we're just trying to seek what is the most right, or which answers are more right than the others, rather than, let's stop pretending that the answer is always brand building, or the only way to do it is through consistency. There's all these things. It's like, the reality is, more often than not, there are many right answers and many wrong answers, and it's our job to try and find the most right or the least wrong.
I think that's completely right. I've often thought there's probably a million ways to do things, and maybe 400,000 of those million are kind of better or good, and the 600,000 are probably wrongish. The trouble is, if you sat in a meeting and were like, here's 100 things and 80 or 90 of them are probably okay, I don't think anyone would buy from you. We're all selling, and so we all have to present a face which is more definitive, more deterministic, more kind of definite, more confident than we could ever actually be in the answers that we're proposing. Creative people, they naturally have to come up with, loads of answers, potential answers, and then select one or two that they think are really, really good, and then sell hard that one thing that they love is the definitive thing. And I can see how that happens. And it's I guess it's about how you persuade people to buy the thing you're selling. You have to look confident in it. And it's part of salesmanship. It's part of showmanship. I guess Paul Feldwick, amazing ability to see the nuances. In his book, The Anatomy of Humbug, he explains a lot of the history of a lot of the concepts that we use. And what you see in that history is individuals who often worked for an agency, let's say Rosser Reeves or Claude Hopkins or Ogilvy or Birnbach. They were an individual, usually a man, because of the history of these places. And they were coming up with a proposition to sell their company to their potential clients. And so many of those bits of language, the USP being one, these bits of language that we've kind of adopted unquestioningly because they sort of survived the survival of the fittest, which is, the ideas and concepts that we use in marketing. Yeah. It's a really fascinating history of all these things that they've kind of end up being things and language that we use. But so often they're rooted in nothing other than an individual's desire to sell their apparently unique way of doing things, which, of course, when you read that kind of history and when you look at it and when you think really rationally about it, there's a million ways of doing things. And in fact, even in those individual cases, they weren't consistent with how they were doing it. I mean, when I was at BBH, we talked about ZAG all the time, difference, the importance of doing something incredibly different from the market. What percentage of work that I did when I was at that agency was genuinely one of those? Probably, 10%, 5%. Yeah. The actual job that we're doing is often not the thing we say we're doing. And so I think what we're not doing is we're not doing research, real academic research. We're selling ideas. We're selling our companies. We're selling our thought leadership. We're selling ourselves, more and more through something like LinkedIn. So all that stuff is not real. It's not academic research. It's not science. And much as some of the kind of marketing scientists would say some of the things they're doing is real, genuine academic science and research, what we're doing is selling our wares to other companies.
Yeah. Now you mentioned LinkedIn there. Do you think, to what extent do you think that social media is responsible for reinforcing this tribalism, these false dichotomies that we're looking to banish?
I think social media, and particularly LinkedIn, amplify and accelerate it. I think they create bubbles that we're in. I love it when those bubbles cross over, but I do think that those tribes pre-existed or were able to pre-exist in a world without social, without LinkedIn. When it was, I don't know, I imagine Ogilvy used to take out full page press ads in the New York Times or whatever. In fact, I'm pretty sure he did, selling their particular perspective. And I'm sure Birnbach had a particularly artful and creative and imaginative way of responding to that. And I'm sure the direct response people had their own ways. Maybe they sent it to you in a DM pack. And it's just a human thing. I think it's just, sadly, we're all having to be present on this one particular channel called LinkedIn. I mean, channels come and go, don't they? I mean, I imagine a world in which LinkedIn will see somehow decline in importance for us, and we'll be using more, Reddit. People keep telling me is an amazing community for this kind of stuff. I'm sure it's just as divided and it's just as tribal. I think it's just a human thing. These platforms are a reflection of us. They're not some completely alien thing that has made us bad people or different people. They just accelerate human behavior.
Now, Tom, I'm convinced about banishing false dichotomies. I suppose the final question I have would be, if we're banishing false dichotomies in the marketing world, if you had to get rid of a couple specifically, 2 or 3, which do you think are the most dangerous? Which do you think are the most damaging?
I think one of the ones I hate most is we want to do something really creative here. Creative versus non-creative feels like a really odd thing. And I guess you can probably see it in that kind of Birnbach discourse, creative revolution. Because it implies that there's a choice. It implies that there are many, many times when you shouldn't be creative. rather than that it's a huge spectrum, and that sometimes we need to find really smart, subtle ways to add in creativity or wit or charm or humanity into something which doesn't have very much of that, or where there's not very much space for it. And so I think it's that kind of thinking that has probably led to, there's a whole, one of the topics I thought about banishing was ugly ads, all those tiny little square spaces within, on the internet and on our phones, which are just crappy little unthought through product ads, that are kind of banner ads or whatever. And I think that allowing ourselves to ever think that creativity was a choice, I think is a problem. And I think that's been damaging, really, really damaging. And I think we're about to have another damaging one, or we're in it, which is this idea that you can either be machine or human. You choose whether to have human imagination and all the good things that come with that and all the bad things that can come with that, versus, no, we're just going to automate everything. We're just going to have machines doing all of this stuff. And neither of those two things are true. It's probably never been true that you can have a human create advertising without the use of technology. Depending on a human using a pencil is a human being having their ideas executed with the use of tools. The idea that you can have a machine just making communication, making marketing on its own without any human intervention is seriously unlikely that we'll ever get to a place. And it's certainly not true now. And I see that as part of a company where we're doing a lot of that. You can end up mis-selling because we'll get clients go, oh, it's brilliant, just use that thing. And they'll be surprised when you go, oh yeah, it's going to take this much time, this much money to do that. Because, oh, I thought you said it was like a magic button you just press. And it would instantly generate a gazillion versions of this incredible idea that it's also had. Well, surprisingly enough, takes some human effort and setting up and briefing and creation of the right kinds of inputs in order to get to that magic world. It is not a binary choice between machine or human. Never will be. And I think it's the same kind of thing. I think there's a lot of snake oil going on in that world.
Yeah, what I might do is I might throw snake oil in with this, but yeah, we're gonna let you banish false dichotomies within that, in particular, creative versus non-creative, machine versus human. We talked earlier about brand versus performance. I think there's so much in this where you're right. The reality lives in. It depends. It lives in. It depends. It lives in grey. That's the answer to most things, isn't it?
It's true. The other one I might have said was emotion versus rational. I think that they're different things, and I like to think of the fact that you could create a supposedly rational piece of communication that would have some kind of emotional response or impact. The choice isn't between rational or emotional. The choice is between the intensity of the emotional response you're able to create. And often that's not a choice. You're trying to create the biggest, most intense emotional response you can get. But sometimes it's hard to do to get a really spiky, big emotional response. So you have to sometimes be satisfied with a lesser one. And an example I always give is like, if you see an ad, I don't know, like a digital ad for half price champagne from a supermarket, I go, well, I really want that. That's an emotional response, because that's about creating desire. But the ad itself may be deeply unemotional. It may look very rational. And if you're trying to kind of assess whether something is rational or emotional, you'd get that wrong through that lens.
Yeah, I've said a couple of times that I would quite like to rebrand emotion or potentially banish the word emotion and instead replace it with, maybe entertainment or maybe satisfaction. I don't know what the word would be, but when you say emotion, I think, again, when you look at the headline word, it leads towards people thinking you have to have a 1-minute ad with a piano track that's going to somehow make people shed a tear. Yeah. But equally, if you think of the Economist ads, I know you've referenced them in the past. You've got the, I never read The Economist, management trainee, age 42. Is it emotion? I don't know if you'd call it emotion, but you remember it because it is satisfying. It makes you smile. Is that emotion? I don't know if you'd call it emotion or not, but it works because it sticks in the mind, because it triggers some form of reaction in the brain that endures.
Completely. It's about the effect you create. It's a lovely example because you're right. It doesn't look emotional, but it will, you probably get a million different answers, whoever you spoke to, about what is the emotion that particular piece of communication is evoking. Is it kind of, sadness, or there's a sort of sense of, oh, that loser that hasn't made the right choice, or I'm self-satisfied and I'm smug because I do make the right choices and I'm going to have a successful career and status and all. So many different connections are being fired by that headline, that ad, that you're right, don't fit into any particular box. I'm sure somebody could show you their proprietary emotional ranking and response tool with pictures of different kinds of emotions that you get to choose, or a brain scan where different bits of the brain light up, or their 37 emotions that are kind of trademarked.
Yeah.
You could identify which bits, but in a way, who cares? You know, there's inputs and there's outputs and there's intensity of outputs and there's what response you get over what period you get that response. And in a way, that's all that matters.
So, Tom, false dichotomies have been banished.
Thank you. Can I just make one sort of slightly meta point, which is that even the notion of banishment and unbanishment is, you've artificially created this wonderful world in which a false dichotomy exists, and I'm putting a false dichotomy into it. So
this is the last episode of Marketing Room 101.
I think the whole thing just explodes, yeah.
Right. Yeah, fair point. Interestingly, Lindsay Clay didn't quite banish something. She put it into quarantine, which I quite liked.
Okay, so purgatory.
I think she put it into purgatory because she was like, I'm not quite banishing this forever. I'm just going to temporarily hold it here. So maybe that's the compromise. Maybe that's the grey area. Now, while you're here, is there anything that you'd actually like to give back to the marketing world? Is there anything you'd like to return?
It's a slightly serious point, this, but I'm concerned about junior people coming into the industry, particularly strategists, because that's my discipline. And it's a concern for me. I see less and less junior people being brought in. Grad schemes don't seem to exist in the same way that they did. So that's a whole thing that seems to be under threat. And I think the more we see and talk about and use some of the new AI tools that are coming out, the more we can see that I think that is going to be a continuing concern. Yeah. I feel like the industry that I was attracted to and wanted to come and join had a shop window, which was very visible and very part of the culture. That shop window is harder to see through now. I think because of the very many forms of advertising communication within social and elsewhere, it's harder to pinpoint, go, oh, that's the ad industry, than it maybe was. And so there's less of a clear route in. So I don't know what the answer to that is in reality. I think we need to find ways to appeal to young people. I think we need to find great new roles for them. I'm sure technology will be a big part of that. And we need to find the triggers. Often I think it's about talking about how exciting it is to build brands and make social communication be part of the creator economy, all those kinds of things, versus come into an industry with big buildings and people making a certain kind of advertising. So I think we need to find smart ways to be more appealing to a newer generation of creative people, strategic people, and find great roles for them and pay them properly and all the rest of it. Yeah. And I don't think the industry is currently getting its head around that as a problem, but it is going to be a problem.
I would agree. I think I entered the industry about 15 years ago or so, and I think within that time, I've seen quite a pronounced shift, be it through multiple financial crises, through COVID, through all the rest of the things that have gone on. But I think particularly over the last 10 years, my first agency job, I went to a bulk recruitment day with 12 or so other people, and people were fighting to get into that session. And I may be wrong here, but I'm not sure I can see that level of people climbing over each other to get a job now in this industry, which is, it's sad in itself, isn't it? And I think you touched on something before there that I find really interesting, which is the idea that tech will create new roles for young people who have the right skills. Yeah. And I think that's a message that we really need to communicate, isn't it? It's not, there will be no future for young people because tech's going to take your jobs. It's going back to what you'd said earlier, this advancement towards AI, that's going to create jobs for young people who have the right skills. That's not going to take those away, and therefore we won't need these new people.
No, absolutely. And I'm seeing that where I am. We've got strategists on the team who are a kind of hybrid, who maybe have come from the world of copywriting and content creation and are briefing AI tools. They're developing insights, developing briefs, developing copy and content with the heavy use of AI, our AI platforms. That's not a 100% strategy job. It's not a 100% creative job. It's a new kind of role that we're seeing. We've got people who were video makers and cinematographers and producers who are now AI creative people who are producing creative content in a way that previously they were just sort of supervising it. So we're in the very, very early foothills of this, but I can already see, even from my tiny vantage point, new roles being formed. And so I think that's quite encouraging. And it does to me say that we're in a phase of creative destruction. Terrible phrase, but some kind of roles are going to decline in number and type, and some new kinds of roles will emerge. And that's how new technology always works. It takes time. It feels painful. People get very fearful about it. But I don't think we should be fearful. I think we should be kind of practical about it, and in some ways excited and, maybe a little bit nostalgic for the things that are going. But we have to embrace the future, or we're all dead as an industry. We have to, as we say at BBH, run at the future. And that was a concept that agency was tried to live by. And I think we have to see the future as an exciting place, not fearful and scary one.
You started that by saying that this is a very serious point and potentially a bit heavy, but you've managed to turn it around at the end to be a really positive, encouraging thing. So I think that's a good pitch to people. If you've got the right mindset, come into this industry and bring the right mindset. And as organizations, let's tackle it in the right way. I think that's something that we can all take a bit of and take that forward and, make sure that the industry is creative, exciting, interesting, curious. Yeah.
Those are the kind of fundamentals of it, aren't they? And where we do our jobs, how many of those jobs are we in big office buildings, or are we in different places? I feel like it's going to be much more part of a slightly more amorphous creator economy. That's more and more the way the thing that we used to think of as an industry will behave and be. And some of the structures and institutions and organizations won't exist in the same way and won't no longer have a role, I think, because of that. Even thinking of it as the ad industry, I think, is probably wrong. And it's probably been wrong for years, actually.
I would agree. Now, Tom, I'm going to give you back, maybe let's call it great futures for junior strategists as a way of summarising.
Yeah, I mean, God, it could be even great futures for junior people in the creative industries.
Yeah. So before you go, I do just have one last question. And this is my brother's question. So each episode, my brother, who doesn't work in the industry, comes up with a question for my guest. This week, he wanted to ask you, and this might be my favourite brother's question so far. So here's what he's got for you. Tom, you work for a business called Jellyfish. And in the 2008 film £7, Will Smith's character puts a box jellyfish in the bathtub on purpose to kill himself. His plan is to donate his organs and save 7 lives to atone for a past mistake. So, if you had to be killed by any animal, what would you choose and why? P.S. It can't be Binky and Crumble.
Oh my God. He's been stalking me. How did he know about Binky and Crumble? I must have tweeted about them or written something on LinkedIn.
Must have done. I don't know. Like, people have accused me in the past of people have asked, are the brothers' questions from your brother, or do you just come up with them? And it's like, I'll be honest, I've not researched to that level. I didn't know Binky and Crumble were.
Oh my God. I mean, that's an amazing question for all sorts of reasons. What was the Will Smith film called? £7.
Wow.
Okay. I'm going to disobey his rule, because actually the only way I want to be killed by an animal is going to be being licked to death by Binky. Well, Binky and Crumble they are our Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. Crumble's 5 and Binky's 1.5. And every morning and every evening and every night, Binky licks my face. And so she is going to be how I die, I think. I think
we'll let you have that.
I'm really sorry to your brother for disobeying his fundamental rule there. But what a question. Thank you.
Now, before you go, Tom, just let us know, how can people get hold of you if they want to reach out? How can they absorb your incredibly practical advice on how to apply the biggest theories in marketing to your everyday?
Okay, so my blog, it's quite old-fashioned to have a blog, is thetomroach.com, and also I'm there on LinkedIn a fair bit. So LinkedIn, thetomroach.com, And I'm really proud to be this for the next couple of years, the co-chair of the APG with Joe Arden. So the APG is the home of strategists and planners, and it's a membership organisation. It's a not-for-profit, and they do great work training strategy people and with great events and that kind of thing. And you can find me through the APG as well.
Tom, thank you very much for coming in.
Been a real pleasure. Enjoyed it so much.
So that was my conversation in Marketing Room 101 with Tom Roach. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, I'd love it if you could please share it with just one other person you think would enjoy it too. And if you've done anything recently to feel guilty about, for example, if you lent your girlfriend your car for a couple of days and accidentally on purpose forgot to tell her it was out of fuel so that she'd have to fill it up instead of you, then you can cancel out that bad karma in just 30 seconds by giving Marketing Room 101 a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, if you'd like to arrange a free chat about how I and the Principles team can help grow your brand, just find me on LinkedIn under my name, Ben Norman. And if you'd like to know more about Principles, just head to principlesagency.co.uk.